When I found that tube of intimate lube hidden under my husband's office chair, I didn't scream or cry. I installed a hidden camera and went home to cook dinner, because sometimes the best revenge is letting cheaters destroy themselves on video. I'm Sarah, and 8 months ago I thought I had the perfect marriage. My husband, Mark, was a successful insurance broker in Tampa, Florida, with his own office in a sleek downtown building. We'd been married for 6 years, lived in a beautiful house in Westchase, and I genuinely believed we were building something lasting together. I worked as a marketing coordinator for a local nonprofit, and our life looked picture perfect from the outside. But perfect marriages don't survive when one person decides the rules don't apply to them. It started with the little things that every woman recognizes but tries to rationalize away. Mark working later than usual, mysterious phone calls he'd taken another room, sudden interest in hitting the gym and buying new cologne. Classic cheating husband 101, but I kept making excuses because I loved him and trusted him completely. The breaking point came on a Thursday in March. Mark had forgotten his laptop charger at home, something that never happened because he was obsessively organized about his work equipment. He called me panicking, asking if I could drop it off at his office during my lunch break. "You're a lifesaver, babe," he said when I arrived at his building on Kennedy Boulevard. "Just leave it on my desk. I'm in meetings all afternoon." His office was on the 3rd floor, a corner space with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Hillsborough River. I'd been there dozens of times for company events and casual visits, so I knew exactly where everything belonged. I plugged in the charger, straightened up his always messy desk, and was about to leave when I noticed his office chair was pulled out at an odd angle. Mark was obsessive about his workspace. Everything had its place, every angle was deliberate. The chair being askew was like finding a crack in the facade of his perfect professional image. I pushed the chair back into position and heard something slide underneath. When I knelt down to look, there it was, a small tube of intimate lubricant, the expensive kind, wedged between the chair base and the carpet. My blood went cold. We hadn't been intimate in weeks, and when we were, we'd never needed or used anything like that. This wasn't for us. This was for someone else, and it was happening right here in his office. I sat on his leather couch for maybe 10 minutes, just staring at that tube and feeling my entire world shift. 6 years of marriage, all those late nights I'd assumed were about building his business, all those weekend golf trips, with clients I'd never met. How long had this been going on? How stupid had I been? But here's the thing, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't confront him or make a scene. Instead, I got very, very calm, because I realized that emotional reactions wouldn't get me what I needed. Evidence would. I drove straight to Best Buy and bought the smallest wireless security camera I could find. One of those tiny things that looks like a phone charger but records everything to a cloud account. The sales guy probably thought I was paranoid about office theft, but paranoia was exactly what I needed. The next morning, I used Mark's spare office key, the one he'd given me for emergencies, to let myself in before his workday started. I positioned the camera on his bookshelf behind some insurance manuals, angled perfectly to capture his desk area and the leather couch where he met with clients. Then I went home and cooked myself the most elaborate breakfast I'd made in months. Eggs Benedict, fresh fruit, real maple syrup, the kind of meal you make when you're celebrating something. Because in a way, I was celebrating. I was celebrating the end of my naive trust and the beginning of my strategic thinking. For 2 weeks, I watched the footage every evening while Mark was at the gym or out with his mysterious business contacts. Most days were boring, just Mark doing actual work, taking calls, meeting with real clients. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind, if maybe the lube had some innocent explanation I couldn't imagine. But then came April 2nd, a Tuesday that changed everything. At 2:17 p.m., Mark's office door opened and in walked Rebecca Chen, his secretary from his previous job at State Farm. I knew Rebecca. We'd met at company parties, she'd been at our wedding. She'd even brought us a casserole when Mark had the flu last year. She was married to a guy named David, had 2 young kids, seemed like the sweetest person in the world. What happened next was absolutely not sweet. Within minutes of her arrival, they were all over each other. Not just kissing, but the kind of desperate, passionate encounter that happens between people who have been doing this for a long time and know exactly what they want from each other. They used his desk, his couch, even the floor in front of those big windows overlooking downtown Tampa. I watched the entire thing in my kitchen, eating leftover pizza and feeling strangely detached from the betrayal unfolding on my laptop screen. This wasn't my husband anymore. This was a stranger who looked like Mark, but acted like someone I'd never met. But wait, it gets worse. As I kept watching the recordings, I discovered this wasn't just about sex. Rebecca was feeding Mark inside information from her new job at a competing insurance agency. Client lists, pricing strategies, upcoming policy changes, corporate espionage that could destroy both of their careers and land them in legal trouble. They weren't just cheating on their spouses. They were cheating on their employers, potentially breaking federal laws about trade secrets and corporate fraud. Mark's pillow talk was literally criminal conspiracy. Over the next month, I documented everything. 17 different encounters, dozens of hours of footage showing not just the affair, but the illegal business dealings that went along with it. I even caught conversations where they laughed about how clueless David and I were, how easy it was to fool us. "Sarah's so trusting," Mark said during one particularly damning conversation. "She actually thanked me for working so hard to provide for us. If she only knew I was providing for you instead." Rebecca giggled. "David thinks I'm taking extra shifts at the office. Men are so stupid when they want to believe something." That's when I knew exactly how this story would end. I contacted a divorce attorney first, a shark named Patricia Morse who specialized in high-asset cases involving adultery. Florida is a no-fault divorce state, but adultery still matters when it comes to asset division, especially when there's criminal activity involved. Then I reached out to David Chen. That conversation was brutal but necessary. I met him at a Starbucks in Carrollwood and showed him enough footage to prove what his wife was doing. David was a quiet accountant, the kind of guy who probably never imagined his life would involve private investigators and divorce lawyers. "I'm filing for divorce next week," I told him. "I wanted you to know what's coming before Rebecca tries to spin this as something innocent." David just stared at the still photos I'd printed, his hands shaking. "How long?" was all he managed to say. "At least 6 months based on what I've recorded, probably longer." The final step was the most satisfying. I contacted the compliance departments at both Mark's company and Rebecca's new employer, providing edited footage that showed the corporate espionage without the intimate details. Trading confidential client information between competing companies is the kind of thing that gets people fired immediately and potentially prosecuted. Then I waited for the perfect moment to execute my plan. Mark's company was hosting their annual client appreciation event on a Friday evening in May. Big fancy thing at the Tampa Convention Center, all their major clients and employees dressed up and networking. Mark had been looking forward to it for weeks, talking about the promotion he was expecting and how this event would cement his reputation as a rising star in the company. I wore my best dress, did my hair perfectly, and played the supportive wife one last time. We mingled, we smiled, we posed for photos with his colleagues. Mark was in his element, charming clients and making deals. At exactly 8:30 p.m., I excused myself to use the restroom. Instead, I walked outside and called Patricia Morse. "It's time," I said. By 8:45, Mark was being served with divorce papers in front of 300 of his closest professional contacts. The process server found him at the bar, handed him the manila envelope, and walked away while Mark stood there in his expensive suit, reading about adultery allegations and asset freezing orders. But that was just the opening act. At 9 p.m., Rebecca was being escorted out of her office building by security, fired for corporate espionage based on the evidence I'd provided. At 9:15, Mark's boss pulled him into a private room to discuss the same allegations. By 10 p.m., both of their careers were over. By 10:30, David Chen was filing his own divorce papers. By midnight, the story was spreading through Tampa's tight-knit insurance community like wildfire. Mark came home that night looking like he'd aged 10 years. He found me in the kitchen, calmly packing his belongings into boxes. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said, still holding the divorce papers. "Actually, we don't," I replied without looking up from folding his shirts. "Everything I needed to say is in those legal documents. Everything you needed to say was recorded on camera for the last 2 months." The look on his face when he realized I had evidence was priceless. Pure panic mixed with the dawning, understanding that his perfect little secret wasn't so secret after all. "You were recording my office." "Your office where you committed adultery and corporate fraud, yes. Turns out when you give someone a key for emergencies, they might use it during an actual emergency, like discovering their marriage is a lie." Mark tried to negotiate, to explain, to make promises about changing. But I was done listening to his voice. I'd heard enough of it on those recordings, saying things to Rebecca that he'd never said to me, making plans for a future that didn't include his wife. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. Thanks to the evidence I'd gathered, I got the house, half his retirement accounts, and enough alimony to make starting over financially comfortable. Mark had to find a new career since no insurance company in Florida would touch him after the corporate espionage scandal. Rebecca and David's marriage imploded even faster than ours. David got custody of their kids and moved back to Ohio to live near his parents. Rebecca ended up working retail at a mall in Clearwater, her insurance career permanently destroyed by her own greed and poor judgment. Today, I live in the same house in Westchase, but I've completely redecorated it to erase every trace of Mark's presence. I got promoted at work, started dating a wonderful man who actually respects me, and learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply documenting the truth and letting consequences follow naturally. The hidden camera is still in my desk drawer, not because I need it anymore, but because it reminds me of something important. Trust is earned through actions, not words. And when someone shows you who they really are through their actions, believe them the first time. Mark learned that betrayal has consequences beyond just losing your marriage. When you cheat with corporate espionage involved, you don't just lose your spouse. You lose your career, your reputation, and your future. All because he thought he was smarter than everyone around him. Here's what I learned from this experience. First, trust your instincts when something feels wrong. That tube of lube wasn't there by accident. Second, gather evidence before making accusations because emotions fade but documentation lasts forever. Third, cheaters often engage in other forms of deception, so look for patterns of dishonesty beyond just the affair. The best part about my revenge wasn't the drama or the public humiliation. It was watching Mark realize that actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences are exactly what you deserve. If you've ever discovered evidence of cheating and wondered whether you should confront or investigate first, drop a evidence in the comments and share your story. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. I'll see you in the next video.